that. And hopefully you'll be able to get some of your questions answered as well. And so, yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll introduce Dr. Jay Feld to you. We've just gotten to know Jay over the past couple of months, and really it's been great. And Jay is a counselor therapist here in New York City, been practicing here in the city for a long time, also has experience in ministry as well. So he was a pastor for many years before that as well. So kind of understands the church world as well as the therapy world as well. And so just really excited to have what we did is we put a survey out to the congregation last week and then this week as well. And really overwhelmingly, the response that we heard from you was the need for emotional support in this time and for connection and community. And I think they very much go together. So so we just had the idea, well, I wonder if Dr. Feld would be willing to come and just share a little bit about the grief that we're experiencing in this time and sort of how we can manage, maybe some ways forward in managing our emotions as we move forward in through this season. Who knows how long this is going to go, right? And so, so yeah, thank you, Dr. Feld, for being with us today. And he said we can all just call him Jay as well, so we can do that. But welcome, and we'll turn it over to you for your opening remarks, and then we'll enter into our question and answer time as well.
Thanks, Brandon and Jen. Appreciate it. It's a privilege to be here. Thanks for letting me join your community for a little while this evening. My story is briefly, I grew up in a Jewish home in Brooklyn, and sort of a New York Times, New Deal Democrat kind of home. And we moved to Jersey when I was a teenager, went to college, and I found some what we call back in the day Jesus people with the long hair and the guitars, and but they had something. I wasn't particularly interested in the religion part because even though I grew up in a home with some kind of faith tradition, I was pretty much at the age of 18 an agnostic or an atheist to whatever degree you could be. You know, how arrogant is that? You know, at the age of 18, considering that you have a final answer on these things. But I was attracted by these Jesus people, by the joy and the purpose they seem to have in their own life, and then the quality of community and connection they seem to have with each other. And it was all the way till my second year of college that I ended up approaching one of these guys to ask if he could help me study the New Testament, because smart as I was, I figured out that there was probably some connection between the Bible and the way the quality of their life and their relationship. And one thing led to another. And 1974, as a college sophomore, put my faith in Jesus as my Messiah. Was discipled by a campus ministry group. Ended up going to seminary some years later, and learned. I'm very grateful for the grounding in Bible and theology that I got, and ministry skills. Excuse me. But one thing that in retrospect I realized was missing as I got into sort of midlife in my 30s and late 30s was this whole concept of the discipleship of the emotional part of me. They had done a great job, both the campus ministry and seminary did a great job of discipling the cognitive part and the skills part. But the emotional part and the relational part, that was really new. And my wife and I were, at this time, married 15, 16 years. We were doing ministry here in New York. And you know, good-hearted people, good people, but really struggling with these unnamed and unprocessed emotions. Excuse me. And it affected our relationship. And so that was sort of the beginning of my grief journey when we were struggling in year 16 of marriage, and ended up through the intercession of some really close friends, going to see a therapist, Christian therapist, who really helped us a great deal, helped us to put names to the emotions, and gave us skills to how to share with each other in a vulnerable kind of way. And over the couple of years in the late 90s and early 2000s, between our original marriage struggle and then had a pretty serious illness back in 2000, 2001, my father passed away right in the middle of that process. And then by the beginning of 2001, I thought, well, it's been a heck of a year. I'm sure there's nothing else really big going to happen in 2001. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. And so over the space of a couple of years, we got a lot of hits that required us to get on a learning curve about grieving, that we had to begin to understand what was happening to us. Was this depression? Was this anger? What exactly was this? And then we finally were able to put a word to it, that we were suffering from grief, that things were changing around us, and we were behind the curve in knowing how to adapt to it, and even being able to put words to it. We had some people in our church who were sort of ahead of us in terms of this concept of understanding how to grieve well and how to help other people do that. And so that became sort of a subspecialty from our own story. And as it turns out, it comes in pretty handy, because as a therapist for these last 15, 16 years, much of what comes into the office, even if it looks like anger or looks like confusion, much of it is scratched a little bit under the surface, and it's grief. It's unprocessed grief and loss. And when people can begin to put words to it, I've heard it said that if you can name it, you can tame it. Or if you could feel it, you can heal it. And those are cute, and they could fit on a bumper sticker, but they really work. To be able to put names to the stuff that's inside us and then bring it outside and say it to people in a safe, sympathetic, supportive, non-judgmental context brings healing, I've seen. So grief to me has become a major, major category in my work over all these years.
It's great. If you can feel it, you can heal it. There's a lot of hope in there, which I think people are probably needing to name and know that there's healing in there.
Right. I don't think this made it into the material that we're going to present in a few moments. I don't think this made it into the material, and again, this has been my experience. It may not be everybody's experience, but at least in my experience as a follower of Jesus, in the context that began, we weren't encouraged to put names to what might be called negative emotions. No emotions are bad or wrong. All emotions they're just signals from us to us and from us to others that we're joyous, we're suffering, that something's going on that we need to pay attention to. But and again, in my early discipleship, I was never told that it's okay to put into words things that are painful. And in other sort of Christian settings, people talk about not having a negative confession or phrases like that. But I find that it probably does more harm than good to keep that stuff pressed down. Because if I throw it out the front door, it's probably going to come in through the back door and get me that way. Or if I sort of relegate it to the attic or the cellar or the closet, it's going to be knocking. And it's going to, so its head is going to pop up at sometimes very inopportune time. Or it's going to manifest, it's going to come out as things that it's not, as anger, as depression, when all that it is I'm just sad, I'm suffering, and I just don't know how to put it into words. I'm not sure it's okay to put into words. But once we came around people who said, yeah, no, it's really, really important to do that, that was very liberating. And when we began our journey, our emotional health journey 22 years ago, we began to find out that, let's see, I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, if you could heal it, you could feel it. If you can name it, you could tame it.
Yeah, and I would say too, with that said, just a reminder for anybody who's just popped on,
yes.
that as Jay is going through all of his information, and if you have any questions at all that come to mind, don't be afraid to ask. There's no bad question. And again, you can put it in the chat to everyone, or you can direct it to Brandon, and then we'll facilitate that as we go along. So feel free, ask anything.
Right. So in other words, it became really useful to help people put words to it. And again, in a safe, sympathetic, supportive, non-judgmental setting. And all emotions are acceptable. Of course, some behaviors have to be bounded so we could love each other well. But at least in my experience, all expressions of emotion, if they're non-harming and non-violent, they're acceptable. the whole premise of what I do for a living is whatever's going on inside, it's better to get it outside. We should not have to suffer alone.
Yeah.
I've heard people say in my office many, many times, I wish that it could just be me and Jesus, that I wouldn't have to like talk to people about this or deal with people on this. So I tilt my head this way, or sometimes I tilt my head this way. I say, yeah, I'm sorry, it can't be that way. Because we're designed to work these things out and to experience healing in community. The very first thing in the Bible that's not good is when it's still in paradise in Genesis chapter 2, when God creates the man of the species, and the man looks around and he says, I don't know, I look like I'm the only one here that looks like me. And God's pronouncement is it's not good for the man to be alone. And so there's something about, and then we have this concept of we all belong, we're all part of the body of Christ, that we're not designed to just go through this by ourselves, or even to just go through this with us and God. That's the vertical dimension, which is super, super important. But the horizontal dimension of needing people connection, needing to be vulnerable with people, is that's how we're designed. We can't get around it. So hence this topic of grieving, to create safe spaces to give words to what we're experiencing. And of course, your mileage may vary. We're going to talk about. I have a certain take on it. We're going to have a slide presentation in a moment. So as usual, we take what we like and leave the rest. If some of this is not relevant to you, please don't feel it has to be just because I put it down in words. But I'm hoping that that a number of us will be able to identify, not compare with each other's experiences, but identify something that works for us. So let's go. The topic that was given to me was grief and emotional support. And let's see the next slide. This is my plan, by the way. I'm going to read for about 5 minutes, which may seem like a lot, and I encourage you to take notes or jot things down. And after about the 5-minute mark, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to invite people to respond, either with voice or through the chat. I can't figure out how to see the bar and the chat now, so I'm going to rely on you, Brandon and Jen, to give me feedback on what's in the chat box. All right. Grieving is the process by which we respond to and adjust to the experience of loss. The physical experience, the mental, cognitive experience, the emotional, behavioral, social, and spiritual experience of loss. And probably the biggest thing to know about grieving is that it's inevitable, because change and loss is inevitable. I have a tiny toy poodle, and one of the joys of being locked in is I have to go out 5-6 times a day to take him out. So he's my excuse to go out all the time with my face mask. And we pass a little deli around the corner, and which is now closed, but it has the Powerball and the Mega Millions. And so I walk the dog and I see the 100 million, 200 million, and I indulge in 30 seconds of fantasy. And I think, wow, maybe I should play this week. What would it be like if I won $100 million? I would give to Resurrection Life. I would give to my church. I would give. And then I think, wow. Then I start thinking of all the problems. I'd have to get Doberman pinchers. I'd have to put up a high fence, or I'd have to change my number. Because even though that would be a good change, so to speak, it would entail other kind of losses. So it's possible to grieve, even if you get a promotion, even if you move from being single to married, whatever major change we experience, not just the loss, but even seemingly good changes, we don't automatically adjust. We have to put some intentionality and effort into adjusting to any change, and especially losses. The scriptures are full of this concept. Some favorite ones of mine are John 12:24, that if you're a grain of wheat, and if God created you to be to be able to reproduce yourself spiritually, we all want that. But then the punchline comes, oh, by the way, in order reproduce yourself, you're going to have to die. You're going to have to invest deeply, and it's going to be costly to invest in people. If the grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, if it does not, it remains on the shelf alone. Like one little kernel of corn, put it on a shelf, it's not going to do anything. If you put it in the microwave and pop it, then people could eat it. So if we give ourselves up to the microwave process and allow God to work in our life and take us through difficult situations, then it bears fruit and we become something different. Like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, talking about the resurrection, which is relevant from last week, that what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And people in throughout all of history and in agricultural settings, they understood this really well because they knew where food came from. You put the little seeds in the ground, you come back in August and it's all big. And what applies to crops applies to us as well. And then that famous Ecclesiastes 3 passage, that for everything there's a season. And this is a hard one. This is a hard, we hear it in songs, maybe it's sometimes read at weddings. This is a hard one to swallow, that there is a time to be born, which we all rejoice, but there's a time to die. There's a time to plant and a time to pluck up, break down and build up. That all of our life from cradle to grave and beyond is about how to process change and loss. Next slide, please. And the reason we're doing this tonight is because it's hard and we need some mutual encouragement, perhaps some instruction or at least some perspective. And it's hard because we're creatures of habit and we crave stability. That we naturally develop attachments to people, places, and things. And when those attachments and that stability becomes disrupted, we become disoriented and we become afraid. When our attachments are disrupted through change and loss, we're uncertain what's going to happen next, which is everyone's experience right now, everyone on this call and everyone everywhere. We lose our ability to predict and control, and when we see a loss as inevitable. Just to get back to the ability to predict and control, I think one of the cruelest statements nowadays is when things get back to normal. Well, I think even a month and a half into this, we're beginning to understand that the normal things that we hope to get back to may take a while or may not happen. We may come out of this looking very different. Even if we survive this and we live, which the vast majority of people are going to live through this, things are going to be different, and not only bad but good. But again, we are sort of allergic to change and loss, and so this process is difficult. Next slide, please. We can go on and on and on. We could probably add another 10 or 20 or 30 things to this list, that the experience of change or loss can feel a whole bunch of things. Unfamiliar, uncomfortable, disturbing, painful, tiring. That's one of the things I'm experiencing in this season is I must be processing a great deal in the background because I feel tired a lot, even doing simple things and not commuting and doing arguably less than I was before. And of course, anxiety-provoking, traumatic, depressing. And it's not possible to not grieve. So maybe we might be thinking, is there a key, Dr. J, is there a trick to this that I can sort of sidestep or avoid this grieving? If I only have enough faith, and as far as I could tell from my own experience and the experience of people I talk with, it's not possible to not grieve. That our brain and nervous system, our whole being has to work hard to adjust to this, to regain our equilibrium and to quote unquote, to get back to some semblance of normal, or better said, get back to move forward, not get back to normal, but move forward into a new normal. We're affected also by the grief of others. If it was just us and everybody else was okay right now, it would be a lot easier for us. But everywhere we look is people going through exactly the same stuff as we are, or some slight variation of it. And misery does love company, except when we're all miserable at the same time. We get caught in this feedback loop of collective grief and misery. just, I think one more slide, then I'm going to stop talking and invite people to, you know what, I'm going to stop there right now because we're going to get into talking about stages of grief. So I'll stop there. That's a lot of material, like taking a drink of water out of a fire hydrant, perhaps. And I'm going to invite people to respond either in the chat box. I'll figure out, oh, now I can see it. Or just raising your hand and speaking up, and Jen and Brandon will acknowledge you.
Yeah, one question that came in, and we had a couple that were emailed in earlier as well, so we want to ask those. But one that came in from Yining is, what's the difference between grief and disappointment?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I don't technically, I wouldn't know how to answer that. I think of grief as sort of an overarching concept of I've lost my equilibrium. It feels like the disappointment. I think of disappointment as a subset of grief. I was hoping that something would happen. I was expecting that something would happen, and it didn't. And the sort of technical word that we may put to that is disappointment. So I would think of it as a species of grief. But it says in Proverbs that hope deferred makes the heart sick. And we're raised, our parents, you know, if they were good enough parents, you know, if we survived to this point in our life, somebody, if not our parents, then somebody else did something good for us. So they raise us to be competent and to be confident, to have expectations, to be able to go out into the world and do things with an expectation of good things happening, that if we sow good things, we're going to reap good things. And by and large, that's our experience. But of course, it's also true that our vision, our imagination always outruns our reality. So someone has said, you know, that an extra beatitude is blessed are those who expect nothing, for they will never be disappointed. But that's a really cynical way to approach life. But I know people who that's their approach to life because they've been so hurt by hoping for things or expecting things and being disappointed that at some point something just sort of turns off inside and they say, yeah, no, this hoping and expecting is not working for me. So I'm just gonna stop hoping and expecting, and then I won't be disappointed, which is true, except everything goes downhill at that point in time. So it's hard to live on that sort of cutting edge of wanting things to happen, but sort of steeling myself. It might not happen. You know, we scour the scriptures and we try to be accurate about it to figure out, you know, what precisely is God promising, what's a clear-cut promise, what's a conditional promise, what's sort of a general promise, raise up your children in the way they go, when they're old, they won't depart from it. Is that an ironclad promise? Is that a principle? So I think of disappointment as sort of a species of grief. And nobody wakes up any morning saying, yeah, I hope I'm going to experience some disappointment today. But we do. Great question.
Thanks, Dr. J.
Yeah, that was
You're
great.
welcome. You're welcome.
And Ruby asked the question, you know, and she said it's a me-focused question, but Ruby, you are not alone in this. Why do I have no motivation or care for my schoolwork? And that struck me when you said, you know, one of the signs we see is just tiredness. You know, I think I've seen that this week as well. So why?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Ruby. I have an 18-year-old niece who, a 19-year-old, is a freshman here at Queens College. And I think she hasn't confided in me, but what I hear through the grapevine is that she's experiencing something really different, really similar. Number one, Ruby, I don't know exactly, you know, what's going on with you. It could be that somewhere in the back of your mind is, well, you know, I may not get to graduate. I may not be able to afford to stay in school. I may not, you know, all these may nots. So it could be that there's a part of you that's sort of bracing yourself for the worst case scenario, in which case, like, what's the point of going on? Or it could be, perhaps there's a part of you that is just, that is so preoccupied with day-to-day chores and what's going to happen next week and the week after. I think of of our brains as the CPU in a computer that's sort of running constantly in the background. And I think because this is so disorienting, many of us or all of us are experiencing 100 different emotions all at the same time. And it may not seem like schoolwork, especially if it's not immediately relevant. Like if the class is how to make your own masks and make a lot of them quickly, or how to make hand sanitizer with aloe and alcohol in your bathtub, that's really relevant. But it could be that some of your schoolwork or what's going on in school doesn't seem to really relate right now, or it's hard to imagine how this is ever going to be useful. So that would probably, I don't want to heal your wound lightly, Ruby, because there's probably a lot going on under the surface there. But I think a lot of us are in that same boat, that simple things that we used to be up for, it's hard to generate some motivation and care. In which case, it's really good to just put that out there and to put words to it, and to hear that it's normal. So I don't know if that's just scratching the surface, Ruby.
That actually, like everything that you just said, really just kind of like hit me like differently. Like it makes sense. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And it's also good to know that I'm not alone there.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you said that. That's certainly the biggest application for what we're doing now in this hour is that it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, it says, "No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to all the rest of mankind." So it's I've been doing the therapy thing for a long time, seen thousands of people, and there's not a lot of new things under the sun. So odds are, if you or anybody else on this call is experiencing something, and you hear a voice in your head saying, "Yeah, I'm probably the only one," I assure you, you are not the only one who is experiencing whatever it is you're feeling. You're not the only one. So thanks for having the courage, Ruby, to put that into words.
Maybe just a follow-up on that question, because there's a couple that are around productivity. Bonnie said, how do we stay productive in uncertain times? And Lisa said, motivation's been hard. Is there anything we can do for that right now? I mean, how do we process through those things and get back on task if that's, what's required of us?
Yeah, that's, I have something specific about that on the next page, which will come up in about 10 minutes, but let me say something sort of in an introductory way, which unfortunately is sort of the opposite of that, which is I think we all need to cut ourselves some slack. Because to think that we're going to be able to, or somehow magically we should be able to operate at exactly the same level as if this is no big deal, is I think in a lot of words, it's not being gentle with ourselves, it's being unkind to ourselves. It's I'll use a technical phrase, it's sort of self-abandonment. And I can beat myself up, and I've had that experience in the past 5-6 weeks, beating myself up. Why does it feel like I'm walking through quicksand here? So I don't even think it's possible, unless we totally abandon certain parts of ourselves, to act as if nothing is wrong. Now I know we have, some of us maybe have less to do now. I don't know anybody like that, but I know a lot of us have a lot more to do. My wife teaches middle school math. She had to go from 0 to 60 on her learning curve in terms of the technology. And we have, her elderly mom live with us. So all sorts of things are happening. It seems like a lot of people's workloads are doubled right now. And we're just figuring out day to day, like scrambling for solutions to how to get some traction on any of this. So I'll sort of say on the sort of contrary side, of course, we do want to stay productive. There's certain things we must get done for our sake, for the sake of those who we're responsible for. But I would encourage us all to, and to encourage each other, to cut ourselves some slack, because this is really tough. And at least for people who've grown up in America and the West, we haven't had to deal with this. There's people in other parts of the world that are dealing with plague all the time, and war and refugee situations. And So maybe some people even on this call, this is, yeah, been there, done that with this kind of craziness. But a lot of us have never in our whole lifetime, and even 9/11, I was on a call where I heard one of the Redeemer pastors last week say, yeah, at least 9/11, it happened as tragic and had ripple effects out into the future, but it happened and then it was over. But this is a long-term thing, and we don't know how long-term. It's not going to melt away this summer. It's not going to, So we're going to have to. We're going to have to find a new reality, and part of that is, of course, we want to be productive and fruitful, and yet we're carrying burdens now which we've never had to carry before. Individually and families and corporately. So, not sure if that's actually the answer you're looking for, but we'll get into. What does it mean to focus our attention? We'll get into that in about 10 or 12 minutes in the slide presentation. And then I see on the flip side, yes, and that's a challenge too. How do we truly rest? How do I turn my mind off? I was so happy. I actually took a nap this afternoon. So I'm going to pat myself on the back. I was so proud of myself. And I said, Jay, it's okay. You could take a little bit of a nap. Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is not an answer to that question, but it's that beautiful, beautiful invitation of Jesus in Matthew 11, come to me. And if it was ever relevant, it's really relevant now. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest, which is like everybody. So just off the top of my head, first things first, Lord Jesus, I'm really exhausted. My mind's going a million miles an hour. I love the word entrust. This is really a good Bible study to find examples of the word entrust. It says at the end of 1 Peter 4 that Jesus entrusted his soul to him who judges righteously, to his heavenly Father. So the concept of turning it over or entrusting, if there's any people on the call with 12-step experience, one of the steps of 12-step recovery is we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. I love that image. I love that image of me taking my stuff and not just sort of throwing it down or sort of throwing it at God, but sort of entrusting it. God, this is way, way, way too heavy for me. Would you take this? I can't, and you can, and I really want to let you. Well, we may have to say that a lot. We may have to, sort of tattoo that on our arm or put it on a post-it note or have it on a screensaver. I can't, you can, so I'm going to make another decision again right now to turn this over to you. And again, that's just touching the surface of that question about resting, but that's a super important question. Thank you. Difference between sitting in emotions and not sulking. Yeah, that's huge. The first thing that comes to my mind with respect to that is getting it outside of me. I'm much more likely to sit and stew or get dragged down by them. Someone has said that our minds are a dangerous neighborhood. We shouldn't go there by ourselves. So I'm much more likely to sit and stew and sulk if I don't talk about it. If it's just me and the committee in my head, then it's probably not going to have a good outcome. So any opportunity we have, talking to safe and sympathetic people to take what's inside and get it outside. And again, sitting with it, not to dump it off too lightly, but sitting with it, but sitting with other people. Because like I suggested before, we should not have to suffer alone. And some of us, depending upon our family of origin, culture, our own temperament, or trauma we might have experienced, a lot of us grew up in environments, some of us perhaps grew up in environments where we were not allowed to talk about our pain. It was not acknowledged, it was discouraged, it was even punished perhaps. It was disparaged. But to sit in our suffering with other people is really the way to go. So I know for sure your pastors and other people on this call and in the church. But if not, if I have to sort of go round and round in my head, I'm probably going to sulk, or it's probably going to sort of draw me down like quicksand. Great question. These are all just tremendous questions. Yeah, mindfulness. I'm actually going to sort of touch briefly on the concept of mindfulness in a moment, but to me, mindfulness, at least the sort of top level definition, is just the ability to focus my attention where I want to focus it. The people who can't do this, they're called infants and babies. But as we grow, we develop this front part of our brain that gives us the ability to focus, and even if it's only for 10 seconds at a time, counting slowly, from 1 to 10 or backwards from 10 to 1, reciting a portion of scripture over and over, or even just the name of Jesus. I love from the Greek Orthodox tradition that the Jesus prayers have been very useful to me. I walk the dog, and as a part of my sort of walk the dog liturgy, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And slowly, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Or anything else. There's a million ways that God would like that God will allow us to approach Him. But yeah, just the mindfulness to me, at least on the top level, is the ability to change my focus, but to focus my awareness on something else other than the badness and the sadness. And we're going to get to that. I'm going to touch upon that briefly in another couple of minutes.
And I'll maybe just leave this as a question. Maybe I'll deal with it in a little while. But a couple had emailed in a question really regarding, as medical workers, as kind of frontline medical workers right now who are experiencing, I don't know, I'm not sure an analogy at this point, but maybe it's more warlike than anything, being on the front lines and dealing with, death firsthand, some of those things. And so I think that's a concern for some people is, how do I deal with this if I'm working in a hospital, working in those situations?
And how can their families help with that as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would sort of default to that same sort of category of responses I talked about before. Somehow, and this is sort of not to be legalistic about it, but sort of as a cardinal rule, I have to get it out of my head through my lips to somebody else. Now, we can't always do that, and we can't do that 24/7. We can pray it, we can write it down, but thank God we do have technology nowadays to actually communicate with people, even on the fly, on the spur of the moment. But hopefully everybody on this call, in some way, shape, or form, has the ability to reach out and put it into words. And maybe to start, we use a format like this. Hey, can I just tell you, I think I needed about 60 seconds to tell you my story today. And here's the format. This happened to me, this such and such happened to me today, and I felt really sad. Such and such happened to me, and I was really confused. Such and such happened to me, and I was devastated. Such and such happened, and I ended up feeling cynical about it. It seems the research suggests that the ability to put words to what's going on inside makes us feel better. Just simply the skill of putting a word to what's going on inside begins to calm down our brain, nervous system, and body. And even to do it to ourselves, the Psalms, that's all the Psalms are. We have 150 poems or songs with people, David and others, putting into words what they're feeling, good, bad, and indifferent, to God and to their community. In the notes here, and if we don't see it on the slide presentation, then I think your pastors are going to send you these notes. There was a Christianity Today article recently called The Importance of Lamenting in Community. And the Psalms, a big portion of the Psalms are just putting into words our pain, putting it so that God could hear it and our community could hear it. So sort of the same skill, yes, toward the end, same skill over and over and over of this happened and this is how I felt about it. And sometimes, in a high stress situation like the frontline people, sometimes you're not ready to talk. Sometimes you just may want to sit with somebody and hold hands. Sometimes you may just want to sit with someone and feel your eyes get wet and feel tears come into your eyes. So we don't want to be so word centric and word heavy that we always have to be struggling for words. But it is good to have a handful of words: mad, sad, scared, and to be able to say them to someone who's going to be safe and sympathetic. And often we might say, I just want to share. I don't need any feedback right now. I don't need for it to be addressed or fixed, or I think I just need you to listen right now. So just off the top of my head about this, our frontline heroes, it's extremely difficult right now.
It's really helpful.
Shall we go on with the slides here? What do you think, guys? Should we? Okay, we're going to do that. We're still under the heading of why is grieving so hard, and grieving is often hard because we get stuck in it at a particular stage. I don't know a lot of people, even on Facebook anymore, who are denying that we're going through something. But at least at the beginning of a shock or a trauma in the body, the brain, the nervous system goes into shock, and it's good. This mechanism of denial helps us from getting overwhelmed. We get to split off the bad news from the rest of us so that we can actually be productive and function. But if we stay in denial for too long, it prevents us, it just becomes harder and harder to get back into reality, to acknowledge and adapt to what's actually happening. So denial is not bad or wrong or evil, it's normal and natural. But I'm not talking to a lot of people nowadays who are stuck there, but it might come up at some point in time. Where people often get stuck in my experience is anger. It's natural and normal. A bad thing is happening, is happening to us, you want to keep it away, or a good thing is leaving us, you want to go grab it and hold on to it. And the energy that is, I call anger. Some people don't like the word anger for all sorts of different reasons, family, culture, or even spiritual reasons. So we can call it X. We can call it energy X, that there's a certain kind of energy that arises that's natural and normal. A bad thing is coming toward us, good thing is leaving us, and that's the energy that we use to hold on to it. But sometimes we can get stuck in that anger stage, and it just sort of overflows the top, and it becomes our default response to everything. And it's hard to move on. It's hard to actually move to a better place with respect to processing this change and loss and how painful it is. Bargaining is sort of unique. If we're not denying, and if we're sort of burned out on the anger and it's not helping us, then often we default to negotiating. The whole book of Job, pretty much the whole book of Job, is about a very righteous person, really tight with God, and bad things are happening. He has no idea why. It just blows up all his theological categories, and it's a whole book about negotiating, arguing with God. And that's normal and natural because we're casting about for some reason and something we can do. We're just not yet ready to feel the powerlessness of it. So when we're finished denying and we're finished being angry, we start negotiating, and that might look like, if the loss has already occurred, which for many of us it has already, with jobs or loved ones. Sometimes bargaining sounds like, if only I or she or he or they had done something else. We project ourselves into the past and try to sort of recreate what actually happened, and it seems to give us some momentary relief. Can't make a lifestyle out of it, but it seems, in fact, that's the next point. Sometimes this contrary to reality bargaining allows us to escape what's actually happening, if only for a few minutes. That if only this had happened, or I wish this would have happened, or this should have happened. And it allows me to gives me a little bit of a respite from facing what's actually in front of me. Unfortunately, for losses that have already occurred, sometimes the bargaining takes the form of anger at the people that we really want to be on our side, want to stay connected with. We get angry at God, which is okay because he has very broad shoulders, as I understand it. He's not hurt or offended by that. We get angry at God, ourselves, others, or even, and I've heard this many, many times, I'm so angry at him or her for not taking care of themselves, for smoking, for drinking, for not going to the doctor, for putting themselves in harm's way. And that's a form of bargaining too, that I wish this had not happened. And I think a lot of bargaining is fueled and motivated by, we have a sense that when we're not denying, we're not angry, that the very next thing we look over the precipice and we just see nothingness. We anticipate, yeah, if I accept this, I'm going to feel the full weight of my pain and of my loss. And we just don't want to go there. So we come really close to it. We look over the edge. We say, I don't want to go there. We back up to the woulda, shoulda, coulda. But eventually, if we're going to live in reality, in God's reality and our human reality, we will have to, it will serve us well to say, yes, this is happening. I didn't want it to happen. I hoped it wouldn't happen. I tried everything to prevent it, to avoid it, to fix it. But this is actually happening. And another really important piece, which is maybe a much longer discussion, which we touched on already a little bit. We shouldn't have to do this alone, and we get stuck sometimes in grief because we're trying to do it alone, and we are so not designed to do it alone. So if you keep hearing that voice, yeah, you should be able to do this and wrestle this to the ground and handle it yourself. You could say to it lovingly and gently, Dr. J said, voice in my head, Dr. J said, you cannot do this alone. So we're going to have to, you and me together, you could speak to the voice and say, you and me together are going to have to pick up the phone and call someone, text, email, WhatsApp, and find someone to talk to about this, because we're not competent to deal with this all on our own. Let's see. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this, and then we'll stop and take some other questions. Should we try to get rid of it? Now that may seem like duh, like why would we not want to get rid of it? Like, how about like yesterday, get rid of it? But wait, but slow down, because there's a usefulness to our expression of grief. Imagine, those of you who've been around children or have children, imagine if your child, when he was in distress, if they couldn't cry, if they, something physically was wrong and they didn't have the ability to express to you their distress, if they couldn't get your attention, that would be a really bad thing. And if you're on this call, you're a helicopter parent, you'd have to be a 24/7, 365, or this year 366 helicopter parent if your child did not know how to express their distress to you. Brandon and Jen, do you think we're going to have the ability to show this clip, or should we just have people check it out on YouTube on their own?
It might be best just to watch it on their own for the sound.
Yeah, and it's going to be long. It's a 4.5-minute clip. There was a Disney Pixar movie 4 or 5 years ago called Inside Out. Very sophisticated brain science about a family moves from Minnesota to San Francisco, and the little 11-year-old girl, she can't get her parents' attention. She's struggling, and she just doesn't want to express her sadness to her parents, and how that really doesn't serve her well, and the punchline. So it's a big spoiler alert. If you watch this is at the end of the movie, so you may want to just sort of pay the couple of bucks and watch the whole movie, and then you'll see this scene toward the end. But to be unable to access sadness and express it puts us at a real disadvantage, because it's really useful in the context of recruiting others to ourselves and resources to ourselves. Is extremely useful to be able to express our sadness and not hide it under a bushel basket. Should we try to get rid of grief? Well, try as we might, it has to heal organically, because grief, I used to think, not that I used to think about it a whole lot, but I guess I used to imagine that emotions were just sort of abstract concepts that you could turn it on, you could turn it off, and by force of will. Turns out that emotions are not abstract concepts. They're real things. They're really happening in our body right now, as we're sitting here talking with each other right now in our body. And our bodies get really hurt by the experience of some kind of emotions. They're energized by some kind of emotions. They're hurt or disabled by other kind of emotions. And thank God, as individuals and in community, there's the ability to heal, but it doesn't happen magically. It's not clear to me that God can zap us and take away our grief. I think there's a lot of scriptural evidence to the contrary, that it's a process, that mourning may last the night. So that's Psalm 30 or 31, I'm not sure. Mourning, that is grieving, may last the night, but joy comes in the morning. Now, sometimes it's just overnight, but sometimes it takes longer. It's really, 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards. So even if we wanted to offload this immediately, I don't think that's how we're designed. We're designed, when we get hurt, our body has the ability to heal, has an immune system, and has an emotional immune system too, and a social immune system. So in terms of getting rid of it, I think this is the route to it going away and getting better. Is that let's see, our grief is that good grieving means that we courageously face and we perseveringly, we keep on adjusting to our new reality, so that we could receive God's gift of new life. We have the next slide, because there's that Romans 8 verse from the Message Bible, which is worth buying a copy of the Message Bible. I guess people don't buy Bibles anymore, do they? It's just all on our phones now. Romans 8:15 in the Message translation. This resurrection life you received from God is not a timid, grave-tending life. It's adventurously expectant, greeting God with a childlike, "What's next, Papa?" I just love that. And many of us, and most of us, are not thinking, "Oh, this is great, I can't wait to see what happens next." But that's where we're probably going to have to go at some point in time. And we get to take our time. There's no rush, and there's no, denial today, then anger, then bargaining, then depression. There's no rush. It's not going to, we can't rush it. It's going to be more circular, 3 steps forward, 2 steps backwards. But there will be a new reality. And from our point of view, from what we believe is God's point of view, a better reality. So we want to be courageous, and we want to persevere in moving forward in how we heal grieving. And if you don't remember anything else from this whole hour, we can learn, with God's help and the help of our community, we can learn to grieve well. So I mean this to be hopeful, not to be like a bummer of an evening on a Saturday night, but this can happen and will happen by the grace of God and with the help of our community. We're going to get this. So maybe we can pause there and go back to some questions or comments.
One thing I've found myself doing so much lately is when I ask somebody how they are, I find myself intentionally asking, "How are you feeling?" Not "How are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
Just to try to get away from that, it's not about how you're doing or even what you're doing or the productivity right now. It's how are you feeling, and can we name that, and bringing that to the surface.
I heard a pastor on a pastor's call the other week that his new mantra, him and all the staff, is "Are you okay?" Which is really pointed, really cuts to the chase. And so, but some form of how are you feeling, what's happening right now, are you okay? And we've always asked each other these questions in a casual way. How you doing? How you feeling? But right now, we probably mean it. It's probably not a throwaway line now. How are you doing? How you feeling? And then, of course, we have to wait for the answer, of course, which sometimes, in the past we maybe haven't been accustomed to doing.
Right.
Well, if anybody has any kind of last questions they want to get in here on the call, go ahead and type those in. I'll maybe ask a question related to anxiety in this time. I mean, obviously, I think the thing I hear from people, I think it's a grieving, though I don't know many people understand that it's grief right now. I think it's a lot of uncertainty and not knowing what's coming, or maybe it's loss that will be down the road. I might lose my job. I might not be able to come back to New York. I might all these things. And then there's just a lot of anxiety wrapped up in that. In fact, Carrie said that in the chat on Philippians 4:4, be anxious, for nothing, rejoice in the Lord always. But is anxiety related to grief, or is that a whole separate can of worms at this
I
point.
think, yeah, I mean, to me, and this may be a cheat, Brandon, but to me, everything's related to grief. Everything that's painful that I don't want. I mean, if I go to the gym and I'm working out and I'm sweating and I'm hurting, that's the kind of grief I want. No pain, no gain. But most of the other grief, I don't want. So to me, all of this painful stuff comes under that category. But earlier, and when you guys distribute these notes, but one of the slides earlier, when we become disoriented, we become afraid. Disorientation leads to fear. Just it's almost the same thing. We lose our equilibrium. If someone walks up to us on the street and pushes us, then our nervous system is going to react immediately because we're afraid of falling. So, um, some people have said, you know, in other contexts, politics or whatever, some people have said over these past couple of years, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And so I think we could say that with anxiety. If I'm not aware of feeling afraid and anxious to some degree, then I'm probably still sort of stuck in that denial place, which is okay. And it's okay to, you know, because for some of us with something, with anxiety or with sadness or depression, we just don't know how to let it in a graduated kind of way. That I'm afraid, I've heard people say this in the context of sadness a lot. I know I have to grieve. I'm afraid if I start grieving, I'll never stop. I'm afraid if I start crying, I'll never stop. And maybe some people feel that about anxiety too, that I just can't let myself go there because I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to flip out and have a nervous breakdown. And then it's really important to process this with other people. In fact, I think that's the default. I think it's the default from you know, we're born for the first many years of our life. We cannot soothe ourselves. We can't comfort ourselves. We can't regulate our emotions. And we need mommy and daddy to do that with us. We graduate to teenage years. Our peers help us do that. And over the course of time, other people in community help us to co-regulate. We co-regulate. We help each other regulate. So, yeah, anxiety is nothing's more normal than fear and anxiety right now. It says in Proverbs 22, it says, the prudent person sees evil coming and hides himself. Like, and there's a middle term that's missing there. Prudent person sees evil coming, he hides himself. Well, that's because he has a sensibility that something bad is going to happen. He has to protect himself. But a lot of what's going on right now, we cannot protect ourselves from. It's just happening to us. We lose our job. We cannot go pound the pavement, knock on doors to find another job. Somebody's sick. My wife and I know people that have parents in nursing homes right now. They cannot go see their parents. So there's a lot to be scared of, a lot legitimately to be scared of right now. There's about 100 verses. I don't think I counted them by hand, but I did some kind of concordance search. About 100 verses in the scriptures say, fear not, do not be afraid, do not fear. The one I like best is not that. The one I like best is Psalm 56:3. It says, when I am afraid, I will trust in you. I identify with that. That resonates with me. When I am afraid, because the psalmist acknowledges, yeah, he is afraid. We do get afraid. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. So I don't want to block it out. I don't want to hold it at arm's length distance. I don't want to deny it. But like I keep sort of banging the drum on this, we shouldn't have to do it by ourselves. Hey, can I talk to you? Can we talk for 5 minutes? We want to cultivate that skill of reaching out. Hey, could you help me? I don't think I need more than 5 minutes, but I just want to offload because I'm really feeling this fear, and it's going to sort of eat my lunch unless I could tell somebody about it. And you may have to do that daily. I mean, why not? It says in Hebrews 3, we should encourage one another day by day. So especially in this electronic age, why not? I hope that everybody on this call has people on your speed dial that you can actually reach out to easily and quickly.
Great. Good. Well, we've gone through the hour. It's gone really quickly. Anybody have any last questions and anything also, we put Dr. Jay's email address in there. If you guys want to reach out directly to him, you're welcome to do that. He offered that up. And also the link to his book as well. So recommend you check that out.
I appreciate that. It would probably take, a whole nother 12, 15 minutes to finish the slides and to follow up questions. So if you folks are going to distribute the notes that we're working off of to the folks on this call, or put the link or somehow distribute those notes, that'll be great. And I would love to interact with anybody who wants to interact on anything thus far in the presentation or the rest of the presentation we didn't, which is like, what should we do to manage it? So this is me not managing our time really well tonight, because I have some material in the rest of the slides about how is God and our own selves and each other are resources for us to manage this grief. And then a bibliography at the end of books and websites and other resources. So if you're going to put that in the hands of these dear people, then they can get back to me at their convenience.
Yeah, we can do that.
We can interact on that.
Yeah. Is there a way, can you give us a two minute on the kind of what to do with this now?
Yeah, well, I got two answers. First is no. and the other answer is the concept of God, self, and others. When I think of all the resources in the world that I have, because I'm a simple person, and I sort of need to break it down simply. I have God, I have myself as an adult, and I have others. And God gives us what we call spiritual disciplines or means of grace that he's always trying to, make his sun to shine, his rain to fall on us. And we all know some of them, but there's many, many ways that God is always looking at and always knocking on the door of our heart and reaching out. So God is looking to resource us. Our own personal individual resource, just use one quote by George Washington Carver. He was the peanut and sweet potato guy from the last century. He said of his own work in agriculture, he said, if you love it enough, anything will talk to you. That's very simple, but very moving to me. If you love it enough, anything will talk to you. So the adult part of us gets to talk to the young or disabled or sad or afraid part of us and say, that's okay. We have resources. You and me, buddy, we have resources to pick up the phone, to call someone. We have resources to get through this. Because each of us on this call, I suppose, has sufficiently adult parts to minister to the younger scared parts. And then others, we've been talking about that a great deal. Together we could do what we could never do alone. We're not designed to suffer by ourselves. Scriptures are full of that. And then all the one another commandments in the New Testament. But if there was one takeaway, if I want you to remember one thing, it would be by the grace of God and the help of our community, we can do this little by little, one day at a time.
It's a huge word of encouragement. Just that by the grace of God and the help of one another, we can do this. And I would say too, even in this, last couple minutes, if anybody has a last minute question, feel free to put that in the chat. But also, if you want to just go, here's my takeaway. Like, here's what I'm walking away with. Even if it's one word or just a phrase or whatever, like, what are you walking away with to go, okay, I felt like God spoke to my soul right here. Feel free to put that in the chat as well. So one thing that came to my mind as you were talking, and even with the inside out illustration, is that I think John 10:10 has a different meaning to me now than when I was younger, of saying, I want you to have life and have it to the full. And I always think about how that full life looks so much different after you've walked through seasons of grief than it did before, because there is a realization of going, oh, that's included in a full life,
Yeah, this expands, excuse me, I think God intends for suffering to expand our heart. It can have the opposite effect. There's Saul and there's David. Saul ran into, King Saul in the Old Testament ran into trouble and it sort of shrank his heart and shriveled his heart. And David ran into trouble, external, internal trouble, and yet it expanded his heart. So we have the opportunity. So God is looking to grow us up. He's not looking to crush us. He's looking to grow us up here. I like that. Yining, thank you. Yes. Yeah, by the grace of God, you are, and we are adult enough to reach out. Yeah, Brandon, amen to that. Yeah, that's right.
Great.
Well, great. I hope this has been helpful for people. And I know just what to do with all of this that we're all feeling right now. And as Jay said, we're not feeling it alone. I mean, you're not the only one for sure. I would hope that whether you're part of Res Life or part of another church, I would hope that you are connected there relationally. I think that should be a safe space for you to be able to say, hey, do you have a minute to talk? I'm not doing great today, and I'd like to just talk about it. And or whatever church you're part of, would encourage you to do that. If you're not part of a church, obviously would love to have that conversation, or would encourage you to find that for yourself as well. Jesus felt all these emotions too. And he felt grief.
Oh, Brandon, thank you. That's a whole, goodness gracious, that's a whole nother sermon series about the Garden of Gethsemane. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Take this cup from me, which I imagine you preached on or around in the past couple of weeks. But boy, oh boy, yeah, that's worth following up on. That we have the author and pioneer of our faith. He's been there and done that.
Amen.
And he was the exemplar human. I mean, he showed us what it meant to be human, and he dealt with all of those emotions.
Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Well, could I pray for you, Jay, and then also just let's just pray and thank God for this time together tonight as we close. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. Wow, just even that last reminder. Thank you, Jesus, that you know exactly how we feel and you've walked through all of this. And God, I thank you that you have sent your Holy Spirit to be our counselor, to be with us through all of it. And so we are not alone ever because we have you. And yet also, God, even as we prayed in the beginning, you've created us to be in community with one another. So thank you for those reminders tonight, that we don't have to do this alone, and that we can name these feelings that you have given us, and they are not even inherently, they're not bad, because they help us, Lord. And so I just pray that you would even awaken us to be able to name those feelings. And God, I thank you so much for Jay. I thank you for his time. I thank you for his heart, and just the way that you have created him and designed him with such a heart and a passion to serve others and to help others deal with our emotional stuff, God. And I thank you just for giving him the gifts to draw that out and to name them. And so, God, I just want to pray your blessing on him and his ministry. And as he continues to pour into others, Lord, that he would know that he is so loved and he is so poured into by you. And so, God, we just pray your blessing on him tonight. And for each one on this call, God, I pray that they would just know you more, and they would sense your nearness and grow in intimacy with you as we all walk through this season. So, God, keep our hope alive, because you are alive. So we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for inviting me into your community, guys.
Thank you so
much.
for sharing. Our plan is to make this recording available, and so if you have friends or somebody you think would like to hear this, we'll put it on one of our, probably Vimeo or something, but we'll share that link unless you're on here and you're like, no, please don't do that because I said something I don't want anybody else to hear. We'll honor that, but if that's not the case, we'll go ahead and share. And then also, like I said before, Dr. Jay is available if his professional counseling practice is available here in the city. If you're here, even if you're not here in the city, everything is online right now, so that's available as well to you. So I encourage you to reach out if that would be helpful for you.
And his book, we put the link on Amazon, but I'm not sure you can hyperlink to it. It's called How to Stay Attached.
That's it.
So you can find it on Amazon or any place that sells books.
No, just on Amazon, actually.
Oh, only Amazon.
There isn't any other place that sells books.
Yes, not today.
Get it there.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. J.
Okay. God bless everybody.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.